My name is Jim McCachan. I'm the Minister of First Dunboe, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to Articlave, or Articliff, as it was usually spelt in 1718 and is often still pronounced to this day. I am very pleased to welcome you to our exhibition to mark 300 years since the emigration of so many people from this district and from this church in particular. Almost everyone can think of somebody they know who has left these shores to make their lives elsewhere. The fact is that emigration has been a defining factor in the history of Ireland for the last 300 years, and it began in 1718 with the first mass migration of people from Ireland to North America. They left from this province, from this county, from this village, and from this church. It is a deeply moving story with the pathos of parting, vision and valour, hope and disappointment. The minister of this church, the Rev James Woodside, left with over 160 members of the church family in search of a new world. But why did they leave? What was the voyage like? Where did they settle? How did it all turn out in the end? Enjoy your visit, and don't forget to visit the American diner over the road for tea, coffee, cookies and cake. Thanks for coming.
Exhibit 1, Early Emigration. 1718 was a highly significant year in the history of Ireland and especially of Ulster. That year saw the largest movement of people ever crossing the Atlantic to America with the intention of forming new communities together as families in the American colonies. In addition, 1718 started something because it opened the floodgates of immigration from Ireland to that life in America was seen as an alternative to life in Ireland. It has been estimated that between 270,000 and 400,000 people emigrated from Ireland between the late 1600s and 1815, two-thirds of whom were Presbyterians. Francis MacEmmie from Donegal is one of the best known of the early emigrants, and he founded the first presbytery in America in Philadelphia. From the late 17th century onwards, there were also sporadic trade links across the Atlantic, with Derry becoming a busy port. This exhibit, however, pays tribute to the very first people from Ulster who attempted to settle in America, i.e. the famous Eagle Wing expedition. It consisted of 140 Presbyterians and was led by 4 Presbyterian ministers. The ship Eagle Wing was named for the text, "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." That's Exodus 19, verse 4. The Eagle Wing sailed from Groomsport on the 9th of September 1636, but because of mountainous seas, the ship turned back 3/4 way across the Atlantic, arriving in Lough Fergus, Belfast Lough, on the 3rd of November. Miraculously, only one elderly individual and one child died during the voyage and was buried at sea. One baby was born on the journey and was named Seaborn. The Eagle Wing is sometimes known as the Irish Mayflower. In the Bible, God reminds his people of how he had rescued them from slavery in Egypt. "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Exodus 19, verse 4. The vital fact to note was not that God brought them to the promised land, which he did, but that he brought them to himself.
2. Presbyterian discontentment. Why did the people of East Londonderry decide to leave hearth, home and loved ones in 1718 and go to America hoping to build a new Ulster in the New World? There were push and pull factors. Presbyterians had stood shoulder to shoulder with fellow Protestants during the Siege of Derry in 1689, after which the countryside was devastated. The Bishop of Derry, William King, wrote in 1691 that before the siege there were 260,000 head of cattle. In the Derry diocese, after the siege, there were 800. Presbyterians had expected to be rewarded for their loyalty, but they were deeply disappointed. After the Williamite Wars, the establishment of which the Anglican Church was a part, held power in Ireland and passed the penal laws against Roman Catholics, but also ensured that no Presbyterian could hold civil or military office. That Presbyterian marriages were not recognised, meaning that children could be declared illegitimate and so be excluded from inheriting family property. That it was difficult to acquire land to build a Presbyterian meeting house, and that all Presbyterians and Roman Catholics had to pay tithes to the Church of Ireland, a church they did not attend. In addition, by 1718 the Ulster economy was in deep depression and the embryonic linen industry had slumped. Harvest failure from 1717 meant poor crops, disease and death among cattle, resulting in famine in Ulster. Landlords, such as the clothworkers in Dunboe, were also increasing the rents of their tenants. Ministers like the Rev James McGregor of Acadue and the Rev James Woodside of Dunboe were owed money which their congregations could not pay. As Presbyterians mulled over the discrimination and the dire economic situation, many felt that their very survival was threatened. They therefore looked to the New World and hoped that it would be one of religious freedom, plentiful opportunity, and the prospect of land of their own. Our second exhibit reflects how Presbyterians saw life in Ulster in 1718. The Bible tells us that we live in a world which has gone wrong. As a result, everyone experiences illness, disappointment, and grief. Jesus said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." John chapter 16, verse 31.
Exhibit 3, the Petition, March 1718. Everything happened quickly. In March 1718, a petition was drawn up and addressed to Governor Shute of Massachusetts. It was signed by 319 individuals, including 9 Presbyterian ministers. Only a few could not write their names. It stated their inclination to transport themselves to that very excellent plantation, i.e. the New England colonies of what later became New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine and Connecticut. The man delegated to carry the petition to the New England was the Rev William Boyd of McCoskin, who arrived in Boston in July 1718. The Rev Cotton Mather, the leader of the Puritans in Boston, gave every encouragement to the intending immigrants to come to America. He wrote back saying that he hoped that much may be done for the kingdom of God by their transportation. The Rev Mather wrote personally to the Rev James Woodside of Dunboe, promising that he would render him all the brotherly assistance that we are capable of giving you. For that part, the Rev Mather probably hoped that any Presbyterian immigrants would blend in easily with the Puritan New Englanders who shared very similar beliefs. This exhibit shows the names of all the signatories on the March 1718 petition to Governor Shute. Do you see any familiar names? Perhaps even your own. Alongside the names from 1718 are the names of children from First Dunboe, Ballyhacket and Hazlett primary schools. There are also the names of 9 ministers in the Coleraine and Limavady Presbytery, representing the oldest congregations. We don't know how many of those who signed the petition actually sailed to the New World that summer. However, we know that none of the ministers who signed it went. As we look at the names of today's children beside the 1718 names, it makes us wonder where they will choose to spend their lives. Will they stay or will they leave? The people who signed the petition were longing for a better life, a fuller life. Jesus spoke about life as God intended it when he said, "I have come that you might have life and have it to the full." John 10 verse 10.
The farewell, June 1718. Unbeknown to the Ulster folk, there had been a meeting in November 1717 between the Reverend Cotton Mather, Robert Holmes, an Atlantic sea captain, and some land speculators. They agreed that any immigrants would be settled on the frontiers of the New England colonies. This frontier territory was extremely dangerous because of the likelihood of Indian attacks, and it was felt that the Ulster settlers, with their background in farming and frontier life in Ulster, would be well suited to act as a protective barrier for the people in Boston and other towns in New England. Meanwhile, across the sea in Ulster, preparations were underway to leave, even though the folk from the Lower Bann and Foyle valleys had no specific guarantees of land having been set aside for them. The Reverend James MacGregor preached his final sermon in Ireland, taking his text from Exodus 33, where God speaks to Moses as he leads God's people across the Red Sea and out of Egypt, where they had been cruelly oppressed. MacGregor stated that he and his people were leaving because of religious oppression. For the Presbyterians, a covenant people, the Reverend MacGregor must have seemed like Moses, and the Atlantic like the Red Sea. Each family would have been allocated water, meat, and a portion of oatmeal for the journey. This exhibit reflects the preparations on the quayside at Derry and Coleraine. The Reverend James MacGregor of Achidui preached his last sermon in Ireland from Exodus 33. In that passage, God tells his people to make their way through the wilderness to the promised land, and gives them his word that, "My presence will go with you." Moses replied, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here." God's people in every generation trust the Lord to be with them and help them in life's crises.
Exhibit number 5, The Voyages, June to September 1718. We cannot be sure how many people set sail in the spring and summer of 1718, but it was probably about 100 families, consisting of 500 to 1,000 people. From a petition which the Rev James Woodside wrote in 1723, we know that 161 persons from Dunboe, including James Woodside, sailed from Derry on the ship McCallum under Captain James Law. The traditional number of ships that sailed was 5, although we know that 15 ships from Ireland arrived in Boston Harbour in 1718. There were families from Dunboe, McCosquin, Coleraine, Kilrea, Achidui, Ballywillan, Bovidi, Ballymoney and Garva. As part of the migration, there were also families from the Donegal and Tyrone sides of the Foyle Valley, particularly from Artstraw. It was no Atlantic cruise. The journey lasted 6 to 8 weeks, and, by any standards, the passage was treacherous. Crowded into small wooden ships, rolling and rocking at the mercy of the seas, the men and women endured hardships unimaginable to us today. There was no privacy, buckets for toilets, overcrowding, and lack of fresh water. Heavy Atlantic storms would have forced the passengers to remain below deck for long periods, which must have felt oppressive and claustrophobic. At other times there were long periods of boredom. MacGregor's party from Achidui arrived in Boston on the 29th of July 1718, and Woodside's in early September. This exhibit depicts an 18th century transatlantic voyage and the lovely story of ocean-born Mary. Elizabeth and James Wilson were emigrating from Ulster to New England when their daughter was born in mid-Atlantic on the 28th of July 1720. Pirates boarded the ship intending to rob and kill the passengers. When they heard a baby cry below deck, the captain of the pirate ship went down to investigate, and he softened at the sight of the newborn child. He said he would spare the passengers if Elizabeth would give her baby the name Mary, after his beloved mother. She agreed, and he gave her a bolt of green cloth, and asked that Mary wear it at her wedding. Mary's father died soon after they arrived in America. Elizabeth remarried James Clark, another Ulster Scot, and the family settled in Londonderry, New Hampshire, where the settlement celebrated ocean-born Mary's birthday every year. Mary grew up to be a tall, red-headed, well-loved girl, and she married James Wallace, wearing a light green dress at her wedding, made from the cloth which had been given by the pirate. The couple had 4 surviving sons and 1 daughter. 3 of the sons married 3 sisters, and the boys emerged as local political leaders. Ocean-born Mary outlived her husband and moved to Henniker, New Hampshire. When Mary died, she was buried in the cemetery behind Henniker Town Hall. Thought. In Psalm 139, David writes, O Lord, you have searched me, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. Psalm 139, verses 1, 2, 7, 9 and 10.
The ship. As you step on board the ship, try to imagine what it was like to undertake such a hazardous journey 300 years ago. In Psalm 107 we read about people who went out on the sea in ships. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunken men. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for men.
The Welcome, August-September 1718. What happened when this human tide of Ulster emigrants washed up in the New World? It could be summarised in 2 words: expectations shattered. Another establishment, this time a New England Puritan one, which held sway in Boston, feared that the ships from Ireland brought only famine, disease, paupers and Irish. After enduring a long and difficult voyage, the immigrants would have felt a sense of deep despair when it became clear that they were less than welcome. Indeed, one observer noted that the Ulster folk were met with a volley of sticks, stones and other offensive weapons. Coming after the worst winter ever in New England in 1717, the people of Boston were alarmed at the manners and lifestyle, language and poverty of the immigrants. The Puritan fathers of Boston now put their plan into action. While some of the immigrants were allowed to stay in the city, where they were informed that non-payment of tax was not an option, the overall plan for the Ulster immigrants was threefold. Firstly, to position the immigrants on the frontier from Maine to Massachusetts to repopulate settlements which had been abandoned during the Indian Wars in the late 17th century and serve as a human shield to protect the Puritan settlers. Secondly, to create a barrier against the French in Canada, who were determined to seize as much land as possible. And thirdly, to lay claim to land for the provinces in New England, as it was considered advantageous for these provinces to take as much land as they could for themselves. Into this mix, there were also property speculators who were determined to make a fortune by settling the immigrants from Ulster on the frontiers. The Reverend Cotton Mather's warm words of encouragement to come to America must now have seemed somewhat hollow. As a result, there evolved two main areas of settlements for those arriving in 1718 from the lower Bann Valley, and one where the Foyle Valley immigrants made their home. This exhibition reflects the cold welcome that the Ulster immigrants actually received on arrival in America. When the group from Dunboe arrived in Boston, they found that their warm welcome they had been promised did not happen. Perhaps the words of Psalm 146 came to their minds. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. Blessed are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God. Psalm 146 verse 3.
Exhibit 8A, the settlements. Many of the Foyle Valley immigrants settled in Worcester in Massachusetts. They were led by the Reverend Edward Fitzgerald, and although they were only 40 miles from the coast, Worcester was considered a key position to defend Massachusetts and a base to open up more of the country to the west. The settlement in Worcester did not go well. Although the Irish were welcomed initially, there were constant disputes with the English Puritans, and when they eventually began to build their meeting house, it was burnt down by a mob which was led by some of the town's most eminent citizens. Many families in Worcester left and moved on to towns like Pelham, Sutton, and to Voluntown in present-day Connecticut. There the Reverend Samuel Dorrance from the Coleraine Presbytery became their minister. They also founded new towns like Coleraine, and in later years made their way as far as New York State. If land was cheap, the Scots-Irish, as they eventually became known in America, were invariably quick to take advantage of a bargain, and having moved from Scotland to Ulster to Boston to Worcester, another move was no great hardship.
(8B) The settlements. Undoubtedly, the best known part of this saga is that of the Rev James MacGregor and his party from Achadee. MacGregor was a boy at the Siege of Derry, and he was a fluent Irish speaker. He first settled near Boston at Draycott, where he preached during the winter. In the meantime, after MacGregor Petition governor shut for land, his brother-in-law James McKean and some 300 immigrants went to Maine, where they spent the winter starving and freezing at Casco Bay. Leaving some of the party in Portland in the spring of 1719, McKean's family with 16 to 19 other families set sail and headed south to the Merrimack River to Haverhill, where they found an unsettled tract of land called Nuffield. On the 12th of April 1719, MacGregor left Draycott to join them there and preached his first sermon to his own people from Isaiah 32 verse 2. And as a man shall be as a hiding place from the wind and a covert from the tempest, as rivers of water in a dry place, as the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. Many disputes over land rights followed, but by 1720 the New Hampshire government finally gave the settlers a grant of land 10 square miles for a town whose inhabitants renamed it Londonderry. MacGregor became the first minister, and it is said that he climbed into his pulpit each Sunday with a gun well loaded and primed in case of Indian attacks. He died in 1729, no longer a poor man, with a substantial house and a considerable number of acres. Within a generation, Londonderry had almost 2,500 inhabitants and a thriving industry in the manufacture of linen, cloth and yarn. It is said that they also introduced the potato to America. MacGregor's widow Marion, née Cargill, married the Reverend Matthew Clark, minister of Kilrea, who at the age of 70 emigrated to America. In addition to being married for the third time, he became minister of the Presbyterian Church in Londonderry. Clark died in 1735, and his mortal remains were carried to the grave by those who had stood with him at the siege of Derry. Again, some of the descendants of the 1718 settlers moved on, and by mid-century they were crossing the Connecticut River to resettle in Vermont, where others moved as far as Nova Scotia and Canada.
8. The settlements. Thirdly, the least well-known part of the 1718 story is that of the Dunboe contingent who settled in Maine. Woodside's Dunboe party, as one of the last ships into Boston Harbour that summer, were as unwelcome in Boston as the other immigrants. But, in addition, they soon found themselves the object of some keen bargaining as land speculators tried to woo them as settlers. Captain Robert Temple, originally from Cork in the south of Ireland, had ambitions to be a land proprietor in America. He persuaded the captain of the Macallum to sail north, and so the Dunboe party were soon heading for lands at the mouth of the Kennebec River at Merrymeeting Bay in Maine, which were on offer at 12 pence an acre. They arrived at Casco Bay in late September, less than 4 weeks after reaching Boston. In a word, Woodside's party were pawns in a land grab. The settlers found themselves in an area that was densely forested and thus dark and full of the sounds of wild animals, but it all started well. They found some fertile areas with fresh water and good grass for their cattle. However, the indigenous people, the Abenaki, were understandably angry at this invasion of their territory and ordered them to leave. They protested that the newcomers' cattle trampled their native plantings and consumed the food needed for migratory birds. The indigenous people asked the newcomers to fence in their cattle, but the settlers refused. Meanwhile, Robert Temple brought in more settlers during the next 2 years for the Kennebec. The settlers asked Boston for help, but, unsurprisingly, none was forthcoming. The inevitable happened, and when it came in 1722, it came with a vengeance. The Abenaki braves swept in, killed some of the settlers, burnt houses, slaughtered livestock, and carried off some of the men to French-held Quebec further north. The women and children escaped, some going back to Boston, where Governor Shute called them traitors for leaving their homes. Some fled to more densely populated areas in Maine like Brunswick and Topsham, while others moved south to Londonderry in New Hampshire or went to Pennsylvania. By 1724, even Robert Temple abandoned the Cork settlement as it had become known. As families dispersed and they reflected on the hard sea crossing, the cold welcome in Puritan Boston, the reluctance of New Englanders to help them, and the sheer fear of frontier living, many of them must have concluded that the so-called New World was no more than another part of the same Old World with all its problems. This exhibit depicts the 3 main settlements of the 1718 migration. There are many things which happen in our lives which we struggle to understand, and yet deep within we always find a longing for something better. We read in the Bible that God has set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11.
Exhibit 9. The Rev James Woodside. It is said that history is often written by those who succeed. Thus, whilst the Rev James McGregor from Achadui managed to establish one of the first Presbyterian communities in America, with the freedom to organise his own church worship and church government, the outcome for the Rev James Woodside of Dunboe was very different. It seems he settled at a place called Falmouth for a time. As some of the Dunboe immigrants had moved to Brunswick and were without a minister, it was decided to call him to the Brunswick charge. They offered him £40 per annum, a habitable house, and removal expenses. Woodside took up the charge, but he did not stay long. In May 1719, the town of Brunswick voted to continue his services for 6 more months, only on condition that his character improve. It has been suggested that he was not puritanical enough for the Brunswick Congregationalists, and as it was reputed that he had leanings towards the rituals of the Church of England, he was not acceptable to the Presbyterians either. Woodside clearly did not measure up, and he was duly dismissed. However, some of Woodside's family chose to remain in Brunswick, and during the subsequent Indian attack there in 1722, the settlers retreated to Woodside's garrison house as a place of refuge. As a result, Woodside's family lost all their cattle and possessions. In 1723, Woodside petitioned the English king for compensation, in which he claimed that he had brought over 160 people with him on the 1718 journey, and that is how we know how many were in the Dunboe contingent on the ship Macallum. This exhibit reproduces the petition which the Rev James Woodside sent to King George I of England in 1723. Before he sailed for the New World, the Rev James Woodside had been minister in Ardclave, a village which was established by the Clothworkers' Company in 1613. The Clothworkers' motto is, "My trust is in God alone." When he was under so much pressure in New England, Mr. Woodside may have taken these words from Psalm 28 to heart. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped." From Psalm 28, verse 7.
Exhibit 10. The continuing pattern of emigration and the Reverend William Lyle. R.J. Dixon has written, "The significance of 1718 is that the floodgates of emigration were opened for the first time as an outlet for the distressed and discontented, and it showed that for those left behind, life in America was a practical alternative to life in Ireland." In the years that followed, the option of leaving Ulster became the norm. Although maintaining a foothold in Maine was extremely challenging, as the Indian Wars lasted until 1760, a number of Scots-Irish settlements were established. New England, however, was not a fertile territory for Presbyterians, and in the 18th century the vast majority of immigrants entered America further south through the towns like Newcastle in Delaware and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Immigration from Dunboe was relentless and continued throughout the 19th century. For example, Alexandra MacLean from Farne, Leicester emigrated around 1820, stopping at Easton, Pennsylvania, and then migrating to a town called Mosh Chunk. He found employment with the Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company, which was significant in anthracite mining and iron smelting, which laid the foundation upon which one aspect of the American Industrial Revolution was built. Between 1835 and 1854, 34 individuals from Dunboe were enrolled as members of the First Presbyterian Church in Mosh Chunk. Others from Dunboe were already in nearby Northampton County, Pennsylvania, and as a result the area between Lehigh and Delaware rivers became known as the Irish Settlement. The church in Mosh Chunk also had members who had come from other congregations in the Lower Bann area, including Kilray, Terrace Row, New Row, Drumachose, Acadue, Baltea and Ballywillan. Clearly the news had spread through the Foyle and Bann valleys that there was work in Pennsylvania. In 1839, Robert Henry from Dunboe formed a Bible class, which laid the foundation of nearby Summit Hill Presbyterian Church. Not all emigration was to America. Others went to Quebec, Newfoundland, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. Spare a thought for the Reverend William Lyle, minister of Dunboe for 53 years in the 19th century. 3 of his 9 sons emigrated. He conducted countless special communion services for those emigrating, after which they would sing together the words of Paraphrase 54. "I know that safe with him remains, protected by his power, what I've committed to his trust, till the decisive hour. Then will he own his servant's name before his Father's face, and in the New Jerusalem appoint my soul a place." Mr. Lyle then gave them letters of recommendation for a new church elsewhere. On June the 19th, 1849, the Belfast News Letter reported that 58 persons left the congregation of the Reverend William Lyle of Dunboe in one day this week. Other congregations are losing in proportion. From the Coleraine Presbytery minutes, we know that in 1846, First Dunboe had 700 families. In 1856, 600. In 1867, 420. And in 1889, 240. Not all of those who left emigrated overseas. Some moved to Derry or Belfast. Others went to Scotland or England to seek work and a better life. But the overall trend in the number of families in Dunboe was one way, and that was down. In fact, a decrease of 64% in 43 years. So many left Dunboe during the Irish potato famine of the 1840s that Mr. Lyle could not be paid his stipend, and in 1855 he was presented with a purse of sovereigns and a solid silver tea set and kettle in compensation. These are now in the possession of some of his family who emigrated to Australia. From 1820 to 1920, it has been estimated that 1.7 million people of all creeds and none emigrated from Ulster, many in the late 1840s, as a direct result of the potato famine. This exhibit pays tribute to the Rev William Lyle, who saw several hundred families leave during his ministry, but stayed steadfast to the people in Dunboe. After Jesus was raised from the dead by God the Father, he gave his disciples this commission: "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, wherever you go, make disciples of all nations." Matthew 28, verses 18 to 19.
Exhibit 11. The Rev James Mark's tour of the United States in 1926. Mr. Mark's objective in visiting America was to raise funds for the renovation of the old Dunboe Church, built in 1785. He had written a short historical sketch of First Dunboe in 1915, in which he highlighted the American connection, and realizing that the emigrations of the 18th and 19th centuries gave the congregation tangible links with America, he set about cultivating the relationship. A small pamphlet was printed which appealed to Americans for help to rebuild the old mother church at Dunboe. Letters of recommendation were included from the moderator and the clerk of the General Assembly and the clerk of the Korean Presbytery. Mr. Ben Henry of Carnegie later admitted that a number of elders considered the scheme a wild goose chase, but Mr. Mark had retorted, "No surrender," and proceeded to make plans. He arrived first in New York, which he described as a city owned by the Jew, run by the Irish, and occasionally visited by the American. There he made his headquarters in the home of Mr. David Lindsay. From there, said Mr. Mark, it was a story of adventure, romance, and sacrifice, as he occupied pulpits in New York, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Chicago, taking every opportunity to present the financial needs of Dunboe. Fortunately, he arrived in America at a boom time when Americans were relatively optimistic about the future. This exhibit is a depiction of 1920s America before the Wall Street crash in 1929. It took great perseverance for the Rev James Mark to set out on a tour to America in 1926 in the face of much criticism. Perseverance was something which Jesus encouraged when he said, "No one who puts his hand to the plough and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God." Luke chapter 9, verse 62.
Exhibit 12. The Crawford Brothers of Packysburg, West Virginia. None were more generous to James Mark and First Dunboe than the brothers John M. and David B. Crawford. They were to be his generous find in what Mr. Mark called Dunboe beyond the Atlantic. The Crawford brothers were the founders of the giant oil well equipped manufacturing business, the Packysburg's Rig and Reel Co. in West Virginia. Born in the thatched house in Market Street in Limavady, the brothers were two sons in a farm of 7 children to Eliza Jane McClanahan and Joseph Crawford. Joseph had been reared on the Crawford home farm at the glebe Castle Rock, and as boys the brothers often visited their Uncle William, who continued to farm there. John sailed to America and his brother followed, and together they made a fortune. In 1926 they gave £100 to Mr. Mark, and over the next 20 years, by which time Mr. Mark had persuaded the congregation not to renovate the old church, but instead build a new one. The contribution £300 for the electric lighting in the church, £500 for the new church building, £1,000 for the new church fabric endowment fund, and £800 for the Sabbath School Endowment Fund. In addition, they ensured that the new church in which you and I are now standing, built by William Crawford, a cousin of the Crawford brothers, was opened free of debt in 1936. That a wall was built around 3 sides instead of a sod ditch, and that all the pews were cushioned. In appreciation of their generosity, a plaque was placed in the vestibule. In total, Mr. Mark raised £3,600 as a result of his 1926 American tour. The Crawford brothers gave £3,000 towards the building of the new church, and the congregation raised the rest. The new church was opened in 1936 at a cost of £10,500, over half of which was contributed from America. As Mr. Mark stated at the morning service on the 15th of March 1942, First Dunboe is truly an Irish-American church. On that Sunday, the first Crawford Sunday School medals were presented to Florence Graham, Hugh Conn, Andrew Graham, William Conn, James Woodend, Ronald Millen, Annie Graham, Joseph Morrison, John Hutchison, Samuel Barr, and Samuel Millen. This exhibit paid tribute to the Crawford brothers of West Virginia. The Bible says, "Do not hoard up for yourselves treasures on earth, where it can be eaten by moths, or ruined by rust, or raided by robbers. Stockpile treasures up in heaven, where there are no moths, no rust, and no robbers. Where your treasure is where your heart will be also." Matthew 6, verses 19 to 21.
Exhibit 13, Those Left Behind. To this point, most of this exhibition has focused on those who left Ulster. What about those who did not go, those left behind? Some families were undoubtedly glad to see their loved ones leave, realising that there was very few opportunities for them to prosper in Ulster. Other families were heartbroken, but understood that hardship meant that their loved ones had no choice but to leave. Linda Looney, originally from the North Coast, spoke at a family history conference in Belfast in 2011, and she said, "Starting from the time of the 1718 emigration, perhaps as much as a third of every generation in Ulster up until my parents' generation left, taking some elements of their Ulsterness with them, to go and live and die somewhere else. People who remained in Ulster lost sisters, brothers, cousins, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, neighbours, Sunday school classmates, people who sat beside them in church, folk they had been accustomed to meeting at the market. Friends and relatives were lost again and again, not just at one point in the individual's life or in one generation. For the first half of a dozen generations after 1718, it was the equivalent of dying. There was no use beyond the Atlantic, just the same as beyond the grave. We are now at this very significant 300th anniversary of the 1718 migration. We need to acknowledge the incalculable loss felt by those who were left behind. This anniversary is not a celebration, but commemoration. When we also consider the Roman Catholic emigration to America, particularly in the 19th century, we realise that emigration has marked every family in Ireland and across all communities. At a reception for Mr. and Mrs. Mark after they returned from their American tour, the Rev William Finlay of Castle Rock stated, "Mr. Mark has seen the Mississippi, the Hudson and the Niagara Falls, but he questioned if he had ever seen anything finer or dearer to him than the Articliffe River or the Pot of Burn. Perhaps this is what the 1718 commemoration should seek to achieve, reconnect with the long-lost, forgotten friends in America, but also paying tribute to those who stood firm, nurtured the next generation, and faithfully continued to support and build up the church of their forefathers and stayed at home. The final exhibit commemorates everyone who emigrated from the island of Ireland and all those who stayed at home. We have called this exhibition In Search of the New World. We believe that this was what motivated those who left in 1718. Some of them met with disappointment and disaster. Some managed to survive, but things were no better than they had been in Ireland. Some made a success of it, but things were still far from perfect. The Christian hope is that there is a new world where everything will be perfect. The Bible describes it like this: "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and I heard a loud voice from the throne of God saying, 'Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for that old order of things has passed away.'" One day someone asked Jesus about the way to reach that new world, and he replied, "I am the way." John 14, verse 6.
Large-scale immigration from Ireland began in 1718, when over 160 people from this church family, along with hundreds of others from the surrounding region, left for America, or the New World, as they called it at the time. Immigration continued throughout the rest of that century and increased in the 1800s. More people left in the 1900s, and today most people from this area know someone who has left here to spend their future elsewhere. Over the years, thousands of people who have grown up in this church family have left to live out their faith in other parts of Ireland, across the water in England, Scotland or Wales, and across the oceans in far-flung corners of the earth. Many have gone as ministers or missionaries, but most have gone to live for Christ in secular careers. And every week people go out from our place of worship in Artycliffe to serve the local community as followers of the Lord Jesus Christ and to witness to his love and power by their daily lives. We have compiled a brief film of people who have roots here in First Dunboe. Our worldwide family includes all sorts of people serving the Lord in all sorts of work and in all sorts of places.
Hello, my name is Alan Archibald and I go to First Dunboe and I serve the Lord as a farmer in Dunboe.
My name is Heather Cochran and I grew up in First Dunboe. I'm currently serving as a missionary in a church planting project in the city of Porto in northern Portugal. I've been in Portugal for 10 years and previously I served in Brazil. Deus vos abençoe. Ciao.
My name is Charles Hindman and I'm from First Dunboe. I'm serving the Lord as an engineer in Birmingham.
My name is Gladys Wark. I belong to First Dunboe and I serve the Lord in the afternoon club, the choir and tots.
Hello, my name is Jordan McCarran and I'm a member of First Dunboe and I serve the Lord here and through a builders merchants in Korean.
My name is Hazel McMichael. I worship the Lord in First Dunboe Presbyterian congregation. I serve the Lord as a sales assistant in Gordon's Chemist in Limavady.
My name is Wayne McAfee. I'm from First Dunboe and I'm serving the Lord as a missionary in Timbuktu, South Africa.
My name is Rebecca Barr. I'm a member of First Dunboe and I'm serving the Lord as a dentist in County Down.
Hi, my name's Andrew Jeffers and I'm serving the Lord as a cloud services manager here in Belfast.
My name is Tracy Nicholl and I'm a deaconess and I'm serving the Lord in St James's Presbyterian Church in Ballymoney.
Hello, my name is Norman Thompson. I'm from First Dunboe, and I'm serving the Lord as a welder in Ballymadigan.
Hi, I am Eddie Hangman, and I'm from First Dunboe, and I work at Seaview in North Belfast.
My name is Lindsay Conn. I'm from First Dunboe, and I'm serving the Lord as a hairdresser and farmer's wife in Dunboe.
What's your name?
Joe McBride.
And what church do you belong to?
Dunboe First Presbyterian.
Very good. And what age are you, Joe?
3 months off 100.
3 months off 100?
Yes.
You're a great man for that age.
Well.
And are you serving the Lord in here?
Yes. I never forget the Lord.
Very good. So Joe, 100 years is a very big age.
It is.
I'm sure you've done a lot of things in your time.
Yes, I have.
And is there anything you're still looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to the new world greatly.
That's wonderful. Those who left their homes in 1718 in search of a new world were bitterly disappointed. The truth is that there is no perfect place anywhere in this world. However, the day shall come when each of us shall leave home, never to return. Death is the ultimate emigration, and all of us shall travel that road. And Jesus has promised that those who travel it trusting in Him shall arrive safely in the new world which He has prepared. There will be no more sorrow, pain or evil, but it will be completely dominated by love, joy and peace. No wonder our oldest member says that he is looking forward greatly to the new world. The popular Christian author C.S. Lewis wrote about his conviction that all of us are made for that world, and therefore we should make it the main object of our lives to press on to that other country and to help others to do the same. Thank you very much for visiting our exhibition. We hope you have enjoyed seeing it as much as we have enjoyed putting it together, and may Christ be with you as you journey towards the new world.